Hi everyone, good day to you all. I wanted today to do a review on the Schmeisser Two-Stage trigger. This is a trigger for the AR-15, of course, and I picked this up through Polinar Tactical to replace my old Wilson Combat trigger, which I do not currently have in here. What I have in here currently is a KE Arms trigger, which is one of them that I'm going to be comparing this Schmeisser to, as well as to a Timney, which I have on hand. But the reason that I am replacing a Wilson Combat trigger, and the reason it's not even in here, is because when I uninstalled it, I had the big dumb, and I improperly stored it. I stored it very poorly, and unfortunately, when I tried to reinstall it, I found that it was no longer functioning. I think that's completely my fault. That is a trigger I had for a very long time, but regardless, I don't think that it was the trigger's fault at all. I'm pretty sure it was all on me. But at any rate, I did need a replacement trigger. This KE Arms I have in here currently is for a different build that I kind of cannibalized because the lower is off getting re-anodized currently. So that is the need, or that is why I need a new trigger. So we're going to go ahead and get this opened here. Before we get it installed, take a look at a few things with it. When I bought this trigger on Polinar's website, it does say that it is a... so this isn't a drop-in trigger. However, I guess this does have captive pins, as you can see here, which is nice. I don't know, for some reason, when I heard captive pins, I just thought like maybe this is some sort of almost like a drop-in, but it's not quite. There is some assembly required. What I do have in here currently, this KE Arms, is a drop-in, so this will be very easy to uninstall, but will be a little bit more of a process to put in, but it's all good. So this is a German trigger. Luckily, despite that, we do have all the... well, at least I'm hoping that there is instructions in here. There are. So, there is, luckily, everything is written in English as well. So, I'm going to go ahead and get this installed, and if there is any notable points during the installation that differ from a standard trigger installation, then I will be sure to mention that. But this is not a installation video because it's a little... I've noticed over the years that it's just way too difficult to get a proper camera angle on these, so it's just way easier to do it off camera. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in, and we'll test out how it is. So here we are with the Schmeisser trigger put into the rifle. For a few of my thoughts on how the installation went, overall it was a very, very straightforward installation. A few notes, of course. It seems like every time there's a few quirks, with this trigger being no exception. One thing I would absolutely recommend is to read through the instructions fully before you even start. When I was doing this, I was kind of following along with the instructions as you normally would, but the way they worded these, sometimes there is sentences that come later in a step that would have been very useful to know earlier in here. For example, here on step 1, they talk about pushing out an assembly aid. So what that is on the trigger pin, they have this installed from the factory, just this very little pin, or at least it looks like a pin, right? Like this looks like, from what I'm familiar with, like on an HK safety, you have a clamping sleeve, and this looks like a very similar thing. However, this is actually made to just kind of hold things together, that way you don't need to do any weird movements and like have to hold stuff up and all that. And then once you put the trigger pin in, you just punch it through and this just falls out. For a little bit there, I thought that this was supposed to clamp onto it, but it is not the case. This is supposed to just come right out. So, and as for a few interesting things, so these pins are actually held together here. If I go ahead and open up the rifle, so this is very hard to see, and on the camera this actually just looks like part of the spring. But what you have here is a locking plate, and this actually keeps together both the hammer pin and the trigger pin. Pretty similar to your anti-walk, sort of. Now, of course, it's very important to talk about the feel of the trigger, so I was already doing some dry fire with this off camera, and it is quite nice. So when you actually get onto the trigger here, you have a little bit of take-up. You can see just a little bit there of just slack. This is a two-stage trigger. So once you get to here, you hit that wall, and just firmly press. Up to 4.5 pounds is what this is rated at, and it definitely feels like that is the case. And just a clean break right there. You see there's very little travel. If I go ahead and do the reset now, I was noticing the reset is quite crisp as well. So letting off here ever so slowly. Right there. Very positive reset. So all feels good here. The last thing I want to do, which is vital, is I want to check this out at the range. I always like to verify every trigger with hard primers, if possible. If I have ammo in the caliber, you know, I can do that. And I do. I have some Vimple, very little, but it's a little bit left over, and that has a very hard primer. I have had some issues with other triggers in the past with it, so it'll be a good test. We'll just see if it can set those off. So I'll test that as well as just regular ammo, and we'll see how it does. So we're going to start here. I'm just going to shoot some 223 PPU. I've already been doing a lot of shooting out here already with this trigger, and it's been working fine so far, but just to test things and be consistent for what I said I would do earlier, we'll start with this, and then I'm going to move to 5 rounds of the Vimple Golden Tiger, also 223. As I said, it has a pretty hard primer, so it'll be a good test, but it has a little bit of a longer reset, I noticed, compared to other triggers I've got, but I'll talk about that later, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, and now for the Vimple Golden Tiger, just to show you here, right there. So those performed flawlessly, which is cool. The last time I did this test with that KE Arms trigger, I do like that trigger, but it did have issues with the Vimple. So they clearly don't reuse reduced power springs or anything like that in this trigger, which is excellent. One other thing I found about this trigger that I didn't find advertised when I bought it, I didn't know this is an actual feature of it, but was pretty cool. If you're familiar with AR triggers, as you probably are, of course, normally, and we're clear here, normally when the hammer is dropped, as it is now, you can't put it back onto safe. However, similar to the 416 trigger or the MR556, MR223. So, as you heard, this is dry fire. The hammer has been dropped right now, but you can still put it onto safe. And just to show that that's not a fluke, go ahead and do that. And you can see, still on safe, go back on fire, and dry fires again. So, I really, really enjoy that. I love that as a feature. It's just a lot more safe, especially if you need to clear malfunctions and all that sort of thing. Another thing I noticed is this is quite a bit. I mean, it'll be hard to tell. You kind of only notice it when you actually feel it, but this trigger shoe itself is very wide. It's quite comfortable in the hand compared to pretty much every other trigger I've shot with. It's thinner. It's just kind of more comfortable that way. Compared to all the other triggers that I mentioned, I would be comparing this to. Those are all single stage triggers, so it's not the best comparison, but this does have more travel. It does feel like the reset is quite a bit longer. This is a 2-stage trigger, of course, as I said, so it's not the perfect comparison, but I would still say it's really good. It's a pretty similar weight to the KE Arms trigger I had on here previously. Of course, you have that little bit of take-up in this case, and then there's really not that much after once you hit that kind of first wall until it just breaks really cleanly. The trigger I have probably with the least travel, as I mentioned, that I would be comparing it to was probably the Timney. That you barely, seems like it barely moves and it goes off. It's really nice that way. The previous trigger I had in here, the Wilson Combat, was also very nice in that regard as well. Very light, and that was a 3.5 pound trigger, and yeah, just a really smooth trigger as well. But I love this trigger, as I said. So yeah, it's a little bit more travel and a little bit, just ever so slightly heavier, which I think is fine. It's super light trigger regardless at 4.5 pounds. But the fact that it has that feature where you can put it back onto safe with the hammer dropped, I just really love that. So really liking this trigger. It's working great. I'm going to be doing more shooting with it here as well, but I don't think there's going to be any issues because I've already shot a few, about a little bit over a magazine so far, and not a single malfunction. I wanted to compare the trigger reset and the travel and all that I was talking about from earlier. So we're going to go ahead and start with the Schmeisser one, just to kind of refamiliarize with how it was, even though I did show this earlier. So as I said earlier, you can see there's that little bit of take up at the start, and then you have the wall, a clean break right there with a little bit of travel. And then our reset is just right letting off there. There we go. Here's the chimney now. So you can see it's a lot flatter as well, but this is a single stage. There is no take up, just going right there, and a little bit lighter of a trigger as well. As you can see, there was very little travel. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. So, just letting off, and you can see barely moves whatsoever, and it's already reset. Now, ideally, I would also show the KE arms and the Wilson Combat. Obviously, in the case of the Wilson Combat, that's impossible since, as I said, it broke. And I'm not going to reinstall the KE arms. I thought that I already had footage that would have worked prior to recording this, but the footage where I did show the KE arms trigger, I was actually gripping it from this side because normally I am right-handed, but that's all right. From memory, I can say that the KE arms does have less travel as well when compared to the Schmeisser, but again, that is also a single stage trigger. So hopefully, regardless of that, hopefully that is a somewhat good comparison and gives you an idea of how the Schmeisser trigger feels. As I said, I do like it, and hopefully this was informative regardless. So thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, I hope to see you all in the next one. Take care, and I'll see you all then.